Okay, so the Land Stewardship Subcommittee is meeting today, Wednesday, July 9th, 2025. Meeting starting at 8:30. So our next agenda item is to approve the meeting agenda. Does anyone have any changes? Actually, first I need to take a motion to approve the agenda.
Motion to approve.
Okay.
Second.
Any changes to the meeting agenda? No? Okay, in that case, I'll take, do we have anyone online?
Nope.
Okay. So we can do it by hand. Motion to approve. Raise your hand for aye. Okay.
I think technically if I'm going to be a voting member.
Right, we have to do that before, I guess, do we do it
you
before
have to,
the agenda?
I think you just have to acknowledge
Yes.
that I'm replacing.
Yes.
as an
Let's see,
alternate.
who will we replace? You can replace Mirta.
Okay.
Because we have, so today Sarah Callahan will be voting for our Parks and Rep, Mirta Janos. Okay. All right, June meeting minutes. Can I have a motion to approve the June meeting minutes? Oh, we have our Parks and Rec Director joining us.
I'll make a motion to approve the June meeting minutes.
Okay, second?
Second.
Okay. Does anyone have any changes to the June meeting minutes? Okay, seeing none, I ask for a vote. All those who vote to approve the June meeting minutes, raise your hands. Say one. Okay, and do we have any
Abstention.
abstentions?
And I'll
Okay.
abstain.
Okay, 2 abstentions. Any nays? No? All right, 2 abstentions. So we approve the June meeting minutes. Okay, so move on to our major discussion today, which is the allowed uses on town land and restrictions, and our changes, or any changes. I printed out one paper that I thought might be useful for the discussion, which is just our purposes of our lands, because that does work into the,
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, seems to be seen as a maid,
yeah,
just so you can see
in
the
case anyone's in there.
Yeah.
needs to-
Good
Oh.
people will be anyway.
Another paper. Oh, thank you. Yeah.
In case anyone needs a copy of the paper we're using. Okay.
Is this around? You don't have one? I think I have it.
Right. Caroline Singer has joined the meeting. Okay. All right, so we sent out the paper that we had also sent out last. Where's my copy? Sorry. Anyway. And we had decided that we would do this property by property in discussing the uses and restrictions. So who would like to start? How should we start this discussion? We could just take the sheet as it was worked out for us, and look at the possible, the general restrictions and uses, and then discuss it property by property. Which one's in that list? And I don't know if anyone hopefully made a stab at it before the meeting.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
How does that fit in with this chart that Gail handed out
Right.
a couple meetings ago?
So last meeting, we discussed we sort of shorthanded some of the things that we would put in to the list at the parks, because the list we have is kind of huge. And we discussed the fact that, well, if you can walk at a property, you can also run at a property. Like, do we have to say walking, running, do we have to give all the different possibilities if you're allowed to, walk at the property, And so we decreased some of those into a shorter possibility for uses and restrictions. And that's what's on the top of that sheet.
Yeah, that's what's on the top of the sheet.
Now, and then underneath it, if you see, we have highlights. So we would also highlight certain things for properties, which are sort of more what you might want to use this property for. Like, you might want to take a picnic at this property because we have picnic tables. And instead of having this huge list that was sort of a little hard to, like it was just too much. If you look at it, you're not going to pay much attention to it because there's too many. It's sort of like when you go into a store, if there's like too many choices, you just can't make a decision. So that was the idea behind the sheet that we sent out for this meeting, was that there was a certain number of things that were sort of basic uses of a property, and then we would have highlights underneath it. And then if we want, when the ones we have online, we can put everything down that we want. I mean, sort of because we have space, and because you're not limited on a board like this to about this much of that space. And you're going to use little symbols, and so you want to just use the basic symbols. That's the idea behind it.
Okay, and may I ask one more question? So
Yep.
I'm just trying to understand all the papers we have. And then this one that you just handed
Is the
out.
purposes of the properties, and these were all approved by us and the Conservation Commission, and we read them to the board. So
Okay.
that gives you an idea what the property's for. So a property that is used for, as one of its main uses, wildlife, then that's a consideration when you're thinking about how the property is going to be used by people. A property that is, not, I mean, you can look at the purposes. So part of the purpose of Wagon Hill is to preserve and maintain scenic vistas. So that sort of would make a difference to how you would put in trails or what you would take down. Purpose of the Oyster River Forest is to restore, protect, manage, maintain, enhance the functional values of wetlands and other lands, and conservation of natural values, including fish, wildlife, habitat. That impacts what we put in and what we use it for.
So it's purpose versus what you can and can't do on the property.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly.
So two separate things.
Two separate things, yep.
Now, on Wagon Hill, we're missing something critical there, and that is the agricultural use of Wagon Hill. The fact that there is food production there is not represented in any of the words that are used there.
Well, this comes out of the purpose for Wagon Hill. This is very specific because it is what was on the bond. And it's really the only thing it's sort of it is, because that was what we bought the property for, the driving force. Now, it also, for public benefits of recreation, education, mental and physical health, includes agriculture. That's where agriculture comes out of. But we did not get more specific with Wagon Hill because of the fact that Wagon Hill is a conundrum, because the things that it's for tend to contradict. And so rather than try to come up with a statement full of contradictions, we just decided that the purpose is what we said the purpose was when we bought the place. And that's what's there.
Can you elaborate on when you say they contradict. you know.
Well, to preserve and maintain scenic vistas, but also public benefits of recreation, education, mental and physical health, clean air and water, a wildlife habitat. Those are all, a lot of those things. For instance, public recreation included having, at one point, we used to have big gatherings, the Durham Day and all at Wagon Hill. But that was hard on the physical environment. It created more runoff and erosion, and so we finally stopped doing that. But it was an approved use, recreation. So, but we decided that the recreation could be done elsewhere, and that was maybe too much damage relative to the recreation. Considering we could do it somewhere else. So you're constantly looking at the different things you'd like to do there and deciding where to weight it. The same issue, same discussion when we had the discussion about dogs being left to run, because then you've got the concern with the wildlife and the birds that are nesting there. So all of those things come into the discussion, and we just, as an imperfect group of people, have to decide when is too much, or when is what value do we bring up in this case? And that's the same with parking. How much parking do you want? Well, how many people do you really want on the property? So all of those discussions, and they all go back to this purpose and juggling the uses that are allowed.
So speaking for the Agricultural Commission, though, I have to say that mental and physical health is pretty non-specific when we're talking about food production.
We've had this discussion, and you're right, but it does come out of there. Certainly physical health goes along with eating well, and it's also just a recreation. I mean, I grant you, I understand it's not just recreation when you're growing food, but
So
yes.
I guess what I'm going to say is, when Wagon Hill Farm was purchased, obviously, from my point of view, the emphasis was on conservation rather than both conservation and history. But that was very typical of the time, that conservation excluded historical resources. And I think, LCHIP's response is that now if you are applying for a conservation grant, you actually have to discuss how you're going to preserve historic resources that are on that site. So, how do we change with the times in a sense and update things that are more representative of current thought?
I think historical is covered. It says historical structures for public benefits of recreation, education, mental and physical health, and that's all the things that you highlighted when you put forward the grant.
Right, but I would change historical structures to historic resources.
Yeah,
I know.
I know Megan, I talked to Megan about this at one time, and she said essentially any sort of real historic, native sites that might be on there have been washed away at this point.
But there are
erosion.
also probably 10 other historic.
Right, I mean, there's the old gravel pit, and there's,
Well,
right, and the
that was
cemetery, right? And
But the gravel pit was at the site of a, 17th century house. So, there are a number of resources. So it's not structures, it's resources.
yeah.
I know.
So, and I don't necessarily disagree. With either of you. I think agriculture is it should be within those purposes. I think the question is, can we modify this and say, that, or include those within this purposes statement? Because this was derived word for word from that town vote.
Yeah.
Right? And so those were the parameters, and, everything was thrown in there because they wanted everybody who potentially would be interested or excited in seeing this property protected, right? And so that wide variety of uses means that there are some times where they are at odds with one another, so you get really high increases in recreational use, and that comes at a cost to the natural scapes that are there, right? And I agree that agriculture is important.
Yeah.
So can we, I think, could we change this so it says more than just historical structures, but the historical resources, and add agriculture? I don't see that
look,
we are
can I
confined
stop here?
by that.
We're doing this.
I know.
This is only background,
Yeah.
so that we can do what we came here to do, is discuss the uses of each property.
Yes.
But
Thank
we're
you,
going
Ann.
down a rabbit hole, and I have to tell you that I've been on this committee since it was founded, and we've gone into this rabbit hole over time, over and over again, and what we end up with is this. And it has never stopped us from doing anything. It hasn't stopped that, and I understand your point of view, and people do often overlook history, but I do think that you can get at it there. I mean, even through just preserving scenic it's not what we're here to, what I'm going to say, it's not what we're here to discuss today, and I don't think it'll limit anything we put about Wagon Hill on our site.
And what, the reason I brought that up, because John's point about agricultural use, to me, would also be incorporated under, interpreting the historic resources.
Yeah.
That
They're
was my
connected.
point.
Yeah.
Importantly, we do think of it as Wagon Hill Farm, not Wagon Hill Park.
I
So
understand that.
that's important too.
I understand that. I'm just saying, one, this is not the time and place, and having been through these discussions at least 3 or 4 times, I just think it takes you,
Okay, so can we
Yes.
transition that?
yes. So can
These
we go?
concepts into what uses we do
Yes,
allow at Wagon Hill,
Wagon
which
Hill.
is essentially the template minus bicycles,
Yes,
right?
right.
And so if you scroll down, and it feels interesting that we're starting at Wagon Hill instead of like the start of the alphabet at D, but just a transition. It does say, the highlights are the community gardens and the historical farmhouse, but you could write and other historic resources. But I think there's more to Wagon Hill than just those 2 things, right? To highlight, especially down by the waterfront. But you all went on that tour last month, right? So based on that, you should be able to make some good choices.
And I think
And I don't know if you want to comment that it's a dog park, but probably not.
No.
Probably don't want to encourage more dog users out there.
No, I think that's well known.
Can I ask a
Yes.
question?
Yes.
Segueing back to the bulleted items?
Yeah.
The common, allowed, restricted. The third bullet that says bicycles, class 1 and 2 e-bikes permitted, and then there's a question mark. What does that question mark mean?
the question mark was about, do we even put that on the signs or not? Because
Okay.
we need to remember what we're trying to do is update these allowed uses and highlights to put on the website, and also to principally have adequate and accurate signage at the properties.
Okay.
So that's the goal. That's why
And 1 and 2 bicycles are considered
bicycles.
Bicycles.
By the state.
By the state.
Correct.
Anything
So-
above 1 and 2 is considered a motor vehicle, and is not in anywhere that we don't allow motor vehicles, they're not allowed.
Correct. So except, Wagon Hill does not allow bicycles, period?
period.
Correct.
period. And so the question is, do all of our other properties allow bicycles?
Well, that is something we're going to discuss, I assume, that,
Yeah, we can talk about that. I know the only other one that has some limitation is Long Marsh Preserve, and it's the Sweet Trail portion of the trails. The
Which is
remainder
not.
of, the remainder of the trails are open, and that's because it goes down to Classics Road, and technically you can't really prohibit. But you cannot prohibit, it's like a double negative. You have to allow bicycles on a Classics Road.
Right.
Okay. But all,
And that, it potentially is a really good bicycling loop, or for anybody who's on a road bike or who does kind of like that cross biking between road and trail work, that gets used, that road gets used quite a bit. I don't see them as often on the Blue Trail or on the Orange Trail.
Yeah,
They really just use that corridor along Long Marsh Preserve to
Right.
get from like Bay Road out to 108.
Right.
okay, but other than that, all the other properties allow bicycles?
To my knowledge, yes. All the properties that have trails.
yeah. And we've never really discussed it. I mean, it's just sort of always been it's sort of always been allowed. That's part of what we're doing today, is discussing these specific things. Are there any that you want to leave out? Are there any places that you think shouldn't have bikes?
Well, you
But
can't really
we'll
have
do-
bikes at Packers Falls or at,
Right.
I mean, they're just
Right.
not, they're,
Right.
they're just not there. Sorry, excuse me.
Well, and I think that in places like that, you shouldn't say bikes, because it gives the sense that there's somehow a trail there for a bike
Right.
to use.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
So that's the point, is that we ought to take, so bikes should not be on the Packers Falls. It shouldn't be really on Milne either, because, I mean, that while you can have a bike, obviously, on the sidewalk or on the road, there's no reason to be having people biking around that trail. And is it Milne that has the small loop? Or is it the other?
Neil?
Yeah.
Yeah, you wouldn't have
No.
bikes. There's, I mean,
Yeah,
unless
this-
somebody biked in from town and stopped and to
Right,
walk through the
which-
property.
Right.
But they're not going to be biking.
Yeah, the thing is, that's the thing, is that I think that if you put the bike on, it almost says there's something to do there.
Right.
So you don't want the bike on a property where there really is not something to do.
Correct.
So should bicycles be taken off of this list of common activities?
Well, no,
as a
because I think
result?
for most, it is common activity for most of our properties. But I mean, this is the activities which are going to be on many of the properties, so that we have all of the possible things that you would do on a property when you're looking at the different properties. You don't want to start taking them off, because then we wouldn't even be considering it, right?
So I'm trying to envision, do you see this common allowed uses being like a template? I think Veronique provided a picture where you have
Right.
check marks, next to activities that are allowed.
Right.
Is that what this
So
would
this is-
then become?
Yes, this would be those things that you have on the property sheet that you put out. Yep,
And on the kiosk?
on the kiosk. That's what I
Yeah.
meant, the property
Okay.
sheet that you place in the kiosk.
Right.
Yeah,
okay.
look, so like Anne's saying, if like there's no need even to mention bicycles at like Milne or at like Packers Falls, or because they're not allowed, and it's not that they're not allowed. What's the point? Like, who is gonna come
Yeah.
for the purpose of just biking there?
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't make sense. Anybody who bikes is not even gonna be remotely thinking about going to bike at Milne.
Right.
So I think it's kind of like a de facto thing that,
Yeah.
it makes sense.
If you're telling people what the uses of the property are, no one goes to Packers Falls to bike, right? They may bike to Packers Falls, and we're not saying they can't,
Okay.
but they don't bike at Packers Falls.
So go
Yeah,
ahead.
so go ahead, Gail.
I was just going to add, so this list would appear on each kiosk at each of our properties with check marks next to what's allowed, or I'm just trying to.
No, I think it would be there was like to separate the common, allowed, restricted use we talk about, and then put highlights for each property. So the top part, the common, it's for most properties. So then it can still be adapted. Like we don't need to, that bicycle line doesn't need to be at the properties that are not conducive to biking, for example. But I think most of the rest is pretty much
Okay.
the same at all the properties.
Okay.
So if you want to think about it, we can just get the bikes out of that part and put it, adapt it to each property.
Right.
Yeah, I would, I'm going through the list and like the ones that really have biking use, you've got Doe Farm. And Jackson's Landing's like a maybe. I mean, Rachel will tell you like, no. I
No,
mean, they put in
no.
that trail, but
Wouldn't
it's
put it
been,
on the sign.
so not Jackson's Landing.
Right.
So you've got Long Marsh, Oyster River Forest, and Stonehouse Pond, or Bog. Spruce Hole Bog.
Spruce Hole Bog.
God, where's my brain?
Okay.
Spruce Hole
Thompson.
Bog. So,
Thompson.
and then Stevens Woods, because that is a gateway onto the UNH property.
Right.
Thompson allows it, but there are no mountain bikers out there, and I would argue that maybe we don't want to have them out there.
If I may make a suggestion, I think it might be slightly different what we put online to attract to properties, and it might make sense to exclude bikes from the online listing. But if we keep the kiosks very simple, people are more likely to actually read them and pay attention. And a lot of these properties, I mean, if it's not going to negatively affect the property to have the occasional bike go through there, perhaps because someone is commuting somewhere or connecting somewhere, all of the signage, the space on signage is very valuable. And the more things we list, the less people pay attention to each one. If it's helpful visually, I found this online, and I think that's very similar to what Veronique had showed us.
Right.
If that gives a sense now. But having, it might be worth considering having general rules which are consistent across every single property, and then kind of as one section, and another section that is specific to that property. So, like it would say dogs on short leash at all times, that's part of our general rules, but at Wagon Hill, on the unique features, it would say, dogs off leash permitted from, the hours. But the more that you can build consistency from a graphic design perspective, a communication perspective,
Right.
and a user design experience, the more likely that people will actually be able to follow what we're suggesting to them.
Right, and that's why we are trying to narrow down what we really want to be, like you're saying, on the signs. We can have more on the website still, but on the signs, that's really what's important, because that's what people face when
Well,
they come to the place.
And if we don't put biking at a particular property, we don't necessarily have to put in a restriction, no biking. Unless we actually want no biking, right?
And I would just encourage that each item is very valuable when you go so people can remember, the average person can remember 5 to 9 things total. And that means the short end of that is 5. And so unless the no biking line is very, very valuable, there's probably something that is more valuable
Yeah.
to include as that item. So you could just kind of ignore the biking question. And if it's not listed as online as a destination for biking, I doubt that people will bike to it expecting to bike. But if people show up, will it cause trail damage? Will it really be a problem?
Yeah. And that would be the time when you'd say no biking, if you actually thought it was going to be a problem, you would put no biking.
I like the simplified example, and I think it helps to brand the trails. Like it's like a, Town of Durham branding towards the trails and what's allowed and what's not. And it's simple. There can always be like a QR code right on those, so someone can scan it, brings it right to the website for more specifics on the trails.
So should we concentrate for each property on having no more than 5 allowed uses and no more than 5 restricted uses?
Yeah, the Forest Society signs, their newest signs have about, I think 6. So that's pretty close. They have 6, and they really try to make it equal. So there's 6 allowed, 6 not allowed. So it's not biased on like what's not allowed. You know.
That makes sense.
So that's, and I think I had showed the sign before, and those are, I think that's really important to have something condensed.
So that could be a good template for us to start going through property by property
Yeah,
and saying, of this list of everything that you can and can't do, pick 5 for each, or no more than 5 for each property, according to
Carol.
M's.
So I know you're trying to be consistent with the signage, and I'm sorry, but my focus is on Wagon Hill Farm. And I'm sure you're all aware that the current signage is pretty prolific there right now.
Actually, there
Hopefully, we can kind of streamline.
well, there isn't actually,
There isn't actually a
there is
kiosk.
no,
No,
there
I'm not
isn't-
talking about
There's no
kiosks.
trail map there.
I'm talking about other, I'm talking about up by the house.
Yes.
There are tons of signs.
About parking and dogs.
About everything, yes.
yeah.
Parking and dogs.
Which is,
So-
which is because there is not actually any sign that tells you what is and isn't required.
Right, so,
That's what and that's one of the things we're working on for Wagon Hills, to have a kiosk there.
right.
Yes.
But I wanted to say that relative to the metal detecting, that's a huge problem.
No, that will be on, metal detecting is a town-wide thing, so that needs to be, I think, on all of them.
Right, but what I'm trying to say is, there have been instances when people have called the police, and they don't know how to respond. So there has to be some kind of mechanism for, if people are metal detecting, there's got to be, report this, because it's serious. And it's even going on to neighbors' property. So I think we have to, for Wagon Hill specifically, have to have a, if you see it, call such and such.
Yeah, so, I mean, I don't know the extent, I mean, I saw someone actually across the street at the park using a metal detector at one point, and called the police, but I had to tell the police what the rule was, because they didn't, and they did come and ask the guy to leave. But you can metal detect with permission, but anything that's found has to stay with the town, because it's town
I'm not
property.
sure, because
I'm pretty sure that's what the ordinance says.
I don't know, because the HDC is actually, and the Heritage Commission is actually, we were charged with kind of coming up with rules, and that had been dropped, and now we're bringing it up again, so stay tuned for that.
So there might be changes to the metal detecting rule as it stands right now?
Yeah, because it's my understanding, digging is allowed with permission, but that is to accommodate archaeologists. But
Yeah.
I don't think
Okay.
metal detecting.
So maybe in a couple, I don't think that applies to every property though.
It doesn't.
And
Well,
unless,
except it is
and the
allowed
other thing is
town-wide.
like right now, it technically you can with permission. So maybe it has more to do with, maybe that's more of a link or something like that. Instead of it being in that template no list, like maybe it's itemized out, specifically say at Wagon Hill. I
But you're
don't
not
know if
allowed
they're-
to do it town-wide. I mean, it's not that you're allowed to do it at Thompson Farm and not allowed to do it at
Right.
Wagon Hill. You're not allowed to do it without permission and without specific permission. So
Yeah.
I-
Does the Forest Society have no metal detecting on there?
So that's the sign, I don't know if you can see it, it's only on my phone, from the Forest Society. And that was at their property in Bethlehem.
It's the same everywhere, because I've taken
Yes,
photographs.
so,
It's
yeah.
at George Smith Woodlot, it's at Powder Major Farm.
metal detecting is not permitted.
So
One
you
of their
said-
signs.
Yeah.
It says do not block access gates, carry out all trash, camping is not permitted, fires are not permitted, motorized vehicles are not permitted, snowmobiles allowed only on permitted snowmobile trails, metal detected is not permitting, and target shooting is not permitted. So once again, that's their property, we can adapt that. And on the positive side, it says this property is open daily dawn to dusk, leave any natural and cultural features undisturbed. Dogs must remain under control at all times. Remove all dog waste. Bicycles only permitted on vehicular access road. Horseback riding only permitted on vehicular access road. Hours it do not allow. Hunting and fishing permitted according to state regulations. And common edible plants may be collected for limited personal consumption. So that's just examples. Obviously, some of those we don't plan or want to have on ours. But that's good examples on what's important, what they thought was important to put on the sign, to come back to what Em was saying, which is put out what people are going to remember. And then there's a QR code at the bottom, which goes back to what Em was also saying, is get the QR code to get you back to the website,
Right.
to if you want more
Could you
information.
speak into the left?
Sorry. So I think that's what we're
So-
trying to do.
Yeah, so can we get back to actually, if we're starting at Wagon Hill, go back, look at the daily allowed restricted uses and come up with which of these we think are appropriate.
So Ian, can I make a
Yes.
suggestion
Yes.
to keep that moving forward?
Yes.
If these bulleted items, if we could number them, and then as we go through each property, we could say, yep, 1 through 9 applies to Doe Farm, for example, or 1 through 9, but not 8. And then rather than, I mean, we can either go down that rabbit hole with 8, or we can say, we'll come back to it. Let's move on to the next property. So sort of
Just for us here.
a general pass at each of our properties.
Yeah.
And how do these common allowed/restricted uses apply to each of the properties? And that might allow us to make some progress at looking at each property with an eye, without, kind of micromanaging each issue at this point.
And I'm not even sure that's necessary, because I don't know if I would change these for any of the properties.
Well, the exception would be the bicycles, for example, Sarah. You said,
Right.
oh, like you wouldn't ride bikes at Packers Falls.
Right.
So I don't know if there are any others that fall into that.
I know, but what Ann and Em are saying is, do you actually make that formal, or is it just, you just don't promote it as a
But not promoting it means not putting biking on the website is something you do at that. It's not a use at that. If we think about it, like, as opposed to thinking about it as permitted, if we think about it more as the use of the property, do you use the property to bike? I mean, when I go on and I'm not saying this is the way it has to be, I'm putting it out there. So it's a difference between allowed and used, and which we want to concentrate on. Do we want to put it, do we want to put allowed on maybe the, could I have a show of hands maybe on this? Because I think this is a big difference, allowed or use.
I think we might need both. I think if you think of the trail kiosk, there might be a section which is like, please do, please don't, which should be the same across all properties. So that's like the general norms for all of Durham's properties. Those are
But they're not going to be exactly alike, because bikes are definitely not allowed certain places.
But then you modify those and clarify for this property. So you could have a section that is,
But you can't have bikes allowed and then bikes not allowed in the same thing. That's just confusing, like which part of the sign do they look at?
So then on
I
that
think the
kiosk,
only
you
one
don't
that-
put it on there.
I think the only one that's really an issue with having some properties allowing it and some properties not is the bikes.
It's the bikes.
That's the only
Yes.
one, really. And
It's the only
so
one.
we could go through those property through property, or the other thing that, and not to complicate things at this point, the other thing that I see really kind of missing is you have some properties that just say no trails, but there's nothing in here that say, uses is one thing, right? Anybody can, at this point, go access Pike. They can bushwhack through the woods and get access to the water frontage if they would like to. But there are no developed trails.
Right.
But we don't have anything here about highlights or uses that say, 1.5 miles of
Yeah.
trail, right? You-
Right.
And
at this-
then, and, so I just think that is a big hole in this current, list as presented. And then, there's highlighting different features of the property that people are drawn to for it. And that is slightly different than just trail use, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it's one of the major things people look at when they go to a property. It's one of the things they look to see if they have. So I think that probably trails ought to be on the uses, on the top.
Yeah, and my thinking on that was really geared right now towards the properties with trails. So I totally get what Sarah is saying, but I don't know if we want to put a kiosk at Pike, for example. I mean, are we going to be,
No.
we put a kiosk at Weeks? No. So that's why this template was geared towards properties that have trails. But I agree, we should put the lengths of the trails. We actually were talking about that with Anne, how many trails, or 1.5 miles of trail or loop trail or things like that should be on the signs too. Should have a spot somewhere there.
so do you say common, allowed, and restricted trail uses? To really clarify that these are what we're highlighting on those properties that have trails.
May I make a
Versus-
suggestion?
Yeah,
Just, in the interest of keeping it simple and consistent, we would have a column for permitted uses, a column of icons for not permitted uses, and a third column for highlights. And that's kind of what you have on this page, is the highlights. And under highlights, you can have, 2.5 miles of trails, bird watching, and those things. And maybe that's what we're talking about, is people coming to specific properties for specific purposes. And this is what these properties offer that's different from the other properties. I'm just trying to think about what, Em and Veronique and Sarah are saying in terms of keeping it simple and having, no more than 5 or 6.
Right, but
points.
when you have the signs for the kiosks, the little
Icons.
icons, isn't hiking or walking usually one of them?
yes,
Should be.
I mean, it usually is.
Yep.
So it just seems to me that that's generally one of the things that you put under things that the property can be used for. So, and it doesn't have to be, just put in use of common, allowed, or restricted uses, hiking or walking, or
yeah.
Yeah, walking
That's
slash
just about
hiking
everyone.
usually.
I would just put that as one of the, and then you don't have to put you don't have to put the trail lanes or anything right there.
Yeah.
That could be somewhere else on the piece, but there should be one of the uses of the property is hiking. So I would say that was,
Yeah.
or walking, I don't know which, doesn't
Do you have to
matter.
differentiate between the two?
No, yeah, I mean,
No,
so.
I don't think
What
so.
about an icon that just says trails?
Well, the icon, yeah. Well, the icon wouldn't tell you which one, but I'm just wondering what we put down in terms, if we're writing it, what we put down. I don't think it matters, but I would just
So
put,
then you can hike or walk.
people usually think of hiking as more difficult than walking, right? That's in your head, so maybe walking.
Yeah, walking / running. Because,
just-
as you said at the outset, if you can walk on a trail, you can run on a trail.
Yeah.
You don't want to have a trail where you are not allowed to run.
I don't know, this is a silly discussion, right?
What about an icon that just says trails? And
Yeah.
then it's implied that the
Yeah.
icon that says trails, you can,
Walk, run,
Yeah.
walk your
run,
dog.
yeah.
Jog,
Skip.
hop.
Okay, okay, then we'll just put down trails as another dot there for the allowed,
Yes.
or, okay. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things that are allowed, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things that are generally not allowed. That's what's on this list. So, can we just start with this, instead of Wagon Hill, can we just start here at Doe Farm and work down on this list?
So,
You know,
and if, looking at this list, if you were to, for example, could you take bicycles off that list?
right.
And then we're left with 8 items there.
Well, there's 5, yeah. I just, there's no reason why we have to make them equal, but, Yeah.
And could we all agree that those remaining items are applicable to all of these sites?
daily dawn to dusk, yes. Dogs on leash, under control at all times. Remove all dog waste.
And then if we say, well, we would add hiking, right? Or walking.
Or trails,
Carry in,
yeah.
carry out, and trails. Well, trails, you would put trails at Milne or
Yeah.
Weeks,
Or-
because there isn't a trail there. So there's some that you would leave trails off because there aren't.
Right.
So the
True,
3 that
okay.
you would have
So-
on all of
so
them
we
are
leave
dawn to
that
dusk,
out.
dogs on leash, and carry in, carry out. Those would be true of all the properties. Right?
Yes.
But I would advocate, instead of saying trails, put walking. Because on the properties for which there are no trails, you can still walk around on them. You're just not on a trail. You know, you can go to Pike and you can walk from the road down to the river, and in the meadows, you can walk around, so just a thought. If it's not going down the rabbit hole too much.
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah, it's clear. Walking. It's an invitation. Yeah. So Marty, you're
So-
suggesting take bicycles off because that, it
Right.
doesn't apply to everybody.
Maybe do
Yeah.
we replace that with walking? And then we go through each property and say, these are
Decide
the
what
additional
we
things.
allow.
Yeah, yeah.
And then we
You
just
can
have
go
to-
fishing, you can,
Right.
Right.
Okay.
The thing is you can go fishing on any of them, but not all of them have access to fishing, right? So,
No, I think you put it down, it means you have access. I mean,
Right.
Yes.
I think you have to
Yeah.
put down where there's access.
and
Because you're giving people information, you know?
and if you don't want to encourage bicycling, for example, at Thompson Forest, you don't put a bicycle icon there
Yeah,
with that.
I think that's simple.
So then should we go through the properties and decide which ones we don't want to add bicycles to
so
right now?
I just have one more no
Yep.
thing that needs to be discussed about whether it gets included here or elsewhere or we remain silent for the time being, and that is the current town policy is no hunting
Oh,
on
no
any of our
hunting, yes.
conservation lands. The exception to that is Oyster River Forest because Moose Plate money was derived for the protection of that property, which requires it to be open for hunting. Again, you know, I think that, you know, whether that is on this sign or it probably should have its own separate sign.
Yeah. I mean, it
Yeah,
does-
it's only Oyster River.
I mean, I think it
What has to
does.
be on, I mean, we probably should put that on the allows for us, Oyster River. But then does it confuse people if we don't put no hunting on the others? I mean, maybe we should put hunting and no hunting.
I think you should put no hunting signs up on the kiosks
Do you
that are
think,
independent of this.
do you think you need to advertise that hunting is allowed on Oyster River?
But the trouble is if you don't tell
It's
people, they're
not-
going to assume a no hunting. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's-
But what's wrong with that? I live next to
No,
Oyster River.
but
and-
you're letting people take hikes on a property where people are allowed to hunt, so, and they don't know it. And I'm not thinking of the hunters. Frankly, I don't think a lot of people are going to come hunt at Oyster River because it's fair, it's, you know, it's it's limited, I guess. I mean, I don't know, maybe you would. I've never run into a lot of hunters that,
I've heard shots going out on,
well, but I mean, there are
Right.
other properties nearby where you also might be hearing shots, but
There's so many target practices on
Yeah.
Mill Road. You can often hear that going off when you're in College Woods or Oyster River.
yeah.
I'm not, I've been open about this. I am not opposed to hunting. I think there are a lot of benefits, and you're excluding people that should have the right to access the land. I'm not saying it's appropriate on every property. I certainly wouldn't do it at Wagon Hill. Doe Farm, the trustees have made the decision, there's too much recreation out there that they don't feel comfortable having it be there, but there are certain properties that I think could benefit from being open to hunting. I think that we're seeing a lot of issues from a wildlife management and habitat perspective from the increases in deer populations that we have, especially in the seacoast area,
Yeah.
including the increases in Lyme disease, which has been
And-
found directly involved in that.
I hear what
So-
you're saying, but I also think that, UNH's trails are right next to it, and,
And they allow hunting.
They allow-
I
With
didn't think
permission.
UNH did.
UNH allows
They do.
hunting with permission, so you have to put in a request or a permit just to be out there, but they've never denied anybody, but yes, they
Because
do.
there were a lot of people on that trail.
Yeah. And then the other one is Long Marsh. I don't know if they allow it in Oyster River Forest. Long Marsh Preserve, I mean, we've had this discussion before, like that could definitely benefit from being open to hunting. All the adjacent properties, with the exception of one, allow for hunting, and so often people who are out on the recreational trails on Long Marsh, they might see a hunter carrying a gun. You can walk through carrying a gun. Our law says that in the town, or the regulation, that you can't discharge the firearm when you're on the conservation area. But that doesn't mean as soon as you walk over to the Forest Society property, or you're on Fish and Game property, or all these other properties that are surrounding that you couldn't discharge your firearm. And so I think to alleviate some confusion and the fact that it's already happening out there, minimally, but still happening, like that would be another property that I think should be considered. So I'm not saying every property, but I do think that for those properties that we clearly don't want hunting on, that we say it, and the one that does allow it, like we need people to make sure they're wearing their Blaze Orange.
Yeah.
And even the one at Longmarsh, there should be a sign that says, like,
Hunting in the,
hunting
is allowed. in
is
the-
allowed within the Great Bay Resource Protection Partnership area. And so that people should be wearing their orange out there.
But I don't know anything about hunting, but isn't there a hunting season?
Yes.
So
Yes.
For deer, yeah.
So wouldn't you want to put, I'd be a person who's unaware of when the hunting season is. So wouldn't you want to put some temporary signage at these kiosks during hunting season to let people know?
Yeah.
We discussed that at a previous meeting a couple of months ago about Long Marsh, about having a sign
Yeah.
when hunting season is closed to tell people, hey, all the adjacent properties allow hunting, please wear Blaze Orange, beware. It's more like we want people who do not hunt to be conscious of, first, the person who is hunting around is doing it legally, and that they know so they can take precautions, whatever it is, put an orange vest on their dog, on themselves, respect the times, go online and look at the seasons, the dates. And I talked about that with Steve Eisenhower from UNH, because Stephen Woods, when you walk in the next property, the UNH property, they allow hunting there, one permission, and we should also have a sign at Stevens Wood that says, the abutting property allows hunting.
Right. And it's like 100 feet away. You don't
Yes.
go too far
Yeah.
through
Yes.
Stevens Woods before you're on the UNH
Yes.
property.
And his opinion was we should put temporary signs about a couple of weeks or a month before hunting season starts, so that it's kind of like more visible. It's not like something people walk by all year and they're like, oh yeah, there's that sign there. If it always, or pops up all of a sudden. It's orange, it's highly visible, it's descriptive. But we definitely should have something that tells people hunting is allowed.
There are
Yeah.
also different hunting seasons. I mean,
There are,
another
there's
thing
like
that-
duck hunting.
Duck hunting
and like
is another
and
one.
bird hunting.
And that's
like
big around Doe
grouse
Farm.
and woodcock. And so there are different times of the year that you will
Right.
turkey hunting. And so I actually have to head out really soon, but it sounds like if we're going to move this forward, like the idea of hunting, it won't be on this sign. That do we have consensus like that will be like a separate
A separate sign.
either really highlighting that no hunting is allowed on the property, like Wagon Hill or Doe Farm, or I just want to, does that make sense to everybody, or does?
So right now, the town does not allow hunting on town lands with the exception of the Oyster River Forest, correct?
Correct.
Correct.
So it seems logical to make that clear to the public that
Yes.
there's no hunting on town lands with that one exception.
Yeah, I think what Sarah is pointing out is if it's part of the main sign and the 5 or 6 allowed, not allowed uses, it kind of gets lost. I mean, that's what I...
But you can do both. I mean, you can put it on the sign so people know there's no hunting and still have, because some of those signs aren't about no hunting on our land, they're about the fact that hunting is on the lands around us. You can still do those warnings
On a
on the
separate-
season, on a separate sign, and have it on your kiosk as no hunting allowed on this property. I don't think that they're exclusive of each other.
I'd like to make an observation. There's a trail that I go on in Maine that is maintained by the Maine Coast Heritage Trust, and there's a kiosk at the trailhead, and during hunting season, they have a little laminated sign, which I think is what somebody was saying, that says hunting season, and it points out, duck, from this time to this time, rifle, shotgun, and then it says, please wear blaze orange, and then that's just stuck on to the kiosk during hunting season, whatever it is, from October through January or something, and then it comes off. And it's pretty simple. So that's maybe something that we can consider.
Okay, could I have just survey the committee here? How many people think that the hunting, no hunting should be on the kiosk as one of the major, as one of the items? And how many people think yes, it should be on the kiosk? Okay, all right, so that's one of our yes or no's on the kiosk. So put that down as 10. All right, so now can we start with Doe Farm? Now, Doe Farm will have to be run by whatever we decide. It has to be run by the trustees. But for Doe Farm, so is it 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5? And then all of the no's? Or, because bikes, I think, are used quite a bit at Doe Farm.
Yeah.
So all of these, including no hunting, are on Doe Farm. Anyone disagree? And I think we can not do the highlights right now because we'll never get through the uses.
So
But I'm sorry, but did you have?
On the list you're talking now, are bicycles off this?
No, bicycles are on.
No,
Okay,
All of
bicycles.
the things up here, including no
Okay,
hunting. as
and
opposed to
we've
hunting.
added 10, which is no hunting.
No hunting, right.
Okay.
And then at Oyster River, it will be hunting.
And is walking in our list?
Yes, well, trails, walking, or hiking, but
Is
yes.
number one?
Is-
that number one? Or
Okay,
what?
I put it down at, yes, you can be number one.
Number
That can be
one.
number one.
Oh, then
3.
all the other numbers shift up then?
I guess so, yeah.
Question about Doe Farm, for kayaking there, is there actually there's no boat ramp. So the kayaking, how do people put kayaks in the water? It's just you can access the water's edge?
Yeah, with kayaks, it tends to be more people can go in a kayak and get to Doe Farm. But you could, I suppose, walk a kayak down to the edge and put it in. It's really more that people can kayak and get off there. So,
There's a lot of boaters that stop at Doe
Doe
Farm
Farm.
during the summer.
So
There's
should you
places
use-
that they pull off and then go swimming. And so it is really just that water access. Nobody parks at the parking lot and walks their kayak all the way down to get boat access.
So just take off fishing and kayaking? We don't need to list that in parentheses. Water access implies that there's fishing or access to the water.
Right.
But it doesn't imply that there's a
well,
boat.
fishing, you can access the water to fish, I think.
Right, but if we just list water access, then I think someone would
Oh, I see what you
assume
mean.
that they can go
Yeah.
fishing.
Yeah,
But if we list kayaking as one of the things in parentheses, then that gets confusing whether there's access to dump a kayak
Right.
in or not, so.
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, so
No,
just
that-
water
all right,
access.
Fine,
So
yes.
can,
Or
so for
water
clarification,
frontage?
are,
Well,
I don't know.
would other boats be, what about canoes? I think, kayaking is very specific. Could you say boating? I mean, is there a reason you're saying
But there's no
kayaking
ramp.
instead of
Yeah,
boating?
that's why we just
Yeah,
take
there's
it
no
off.
I know, but I
There's no
just
ramp.
wondered what the intent was.
Yeah, no, I think it was just a use of a word.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you, do we want to put swimming there? Is that,
So the general rule is that swimming is done at certain properties, but we are not going to advertise that ever because it's like a swim at your own risk.
Right, then you should have signage that like no.
That says swim at your own risk.
Yeah, and then you're identifying points. So.
And if Veronique, if you probably want to talk to Rich Rain about that because I think he will very much want to be engaged with any language that is used on signage. You might want to consider having that at Doe Farm. Definitely at Wiswall Bridge, there's signage that says swim at your own risk.
And at
I
Packers
don't know,
Falls.
and at Packers Falls.
Packers Falls, yeah.
So if you wanted to add signage like that at Doe Farm, but
Yeah.
Fortunately, a lot of the swimming that is done is actually done off of the bridge. So it's not on our property.
yeah, no, but there's the rope swing.
Yeah.
People
That's
love
true.
that rope
Oh,
swing.
the road swing, yes.
Yeah, still there.
That is. Okay, so that's Doe
I'm very
Farm.
sorry, but I am going to have to head out to my next meeting.
Okay. Jackson's Landing.
Thanks, everyone. It was good to see you all. Like I can see you all today.
Would it be worth adding seasonal ice rink?
Yeah, because the
Yes,
the
in the
kiosk
highlights,
is
yeah,
gonna be for
because-
the whole property,
Yeah.
so, yeah.
Yeah. But are there any, so bicycles would not be in this one?
I don't think so.
See, no bicycles.
Doesn't make sense.
Are there- And everything else, I don't think anyone would think of hunting there, but no hunting would be on there. And then daily dawn to dusk, dogs on leash, carry in, carry out, walking would all be on there. And then no horseback riding, no motorized vehicles, no camping, campfires, fireworks, no metal detecting, no disturbing plants, wildlife, or cultural features, and no hunting on the other side, right? Okay. Long Wash Preserve. So in Long Wash Preserve, we allow biking, but on this one, we need to note the fact that it's,
Right, it's only contained to the main trail
Yeah.
once you get on the sweet trail on the,
yeah,
you know.
no, that-
Yeah, and it's already delineed on the map, but I
Right.
think it could use its own like fair verbiage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, does the verbiage need to be on this front part, or would it be on, I mean, do we put it in the no, or do we put it up on trails except the Sweet Trail?
Yeah, so we would probably put, bicycles. I don't remember how it's worded on the map, but it's actually pretty good.
But
'Cause-
how do we do this with pictures? You'd have a picture of a bicycle,
An icon of a bike, and either then like CMAP for more information, or something like that. Because right now it's just a little arrow on the map that says no bikes beyond this point. Which we should actually, now that we have the nice bridge crossing, we should also put a sign there that says no bikes beyond this point, because basically that's the point where the bikes are not allowed.
okay.
So
you can bike up to the ridge?
yeah, you can bike on that side trail, and yeah, but not after that.
Okay.
Which would be really hard because it's like very steep after
Yes.
the bridge
You can walk
anyway.
Yeah, you just have to carry
Yeah.
your bike anyway.
Yeah, yeah. So so that's something to think about, like how to write it, because we definitely, the bikes are allowed on that Long March Classics road. So
Right, okay.
I mean,
So,
sorry.
I was just thinking, it's a problem we can solve later.
yes,
We know what
yes,
we're doing,
yes.
let's
I'll
solve
see
that
what it
problem later,
looks like on the
exactly how to
map.
do
Yeah,
it,
yeah,
um,
yeah.
and get through the rest of that. Okay. But not on Sweet Turtle.
If there was like an asterisk or something
Yeah,
Right,
by,
exactly.
and then on that sign, if,
yeah,
Yes.
if you're
Something that
at
refers to
Long
it.
March and there's an asterisk on bicycles
Right.
on the main sign,
yeah, and then you have the asterisks down below.
Right.
and then,
Right.
yeah, people would
Yeah.
know they need
Yeah.
to look for more.
Right.
Okay, Mill Pond Park. Do we take off the bicycle?
I would think you should, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
no bikes.
No bikes.
Mill Nature Sanctuary.
No bikes.
Oyster River Forest, you have to add hunting.
Did you say no bikes for a mill?
Yeah. That's all.
I don't know if no horseback riding would be applicable there because it's a small space. I don't think anybody would take a horse there.
On the Mill Pond Park?
Aren't horses not allowed anywhere on Durham?
Yes,
So
yeah.
it's across the
So
board.
it's a common.
So we have to,
Denominators.
we need to put it on, just like hunting.
Yes. So it's consistent. Yeah.
Yeah. Even if you're right, that obviously. Packers Falls Park, no bike.
So Oyster River Forest, do we
And we're
need-
not saying swimming, right? Because we're not saying swimming anywhere.
Right.
What if we kept that consistent with just water access?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
Yeah.
And then don't say fishing either?
Well, I mean, I think if there's water access,
It means it implies, for me, it implies fishing. Water access implies whatever you can do on the water.
Right.
Yeah.
So just to go back to Oyster River Forest, do we need to note that hunting allowed?
Yes.
Yes.
The thing about fishing though is, like, you wouldn't, I think like Packers Falls is a distinctly nice place for people to go fishing. Whereas,
Yeah, it
Jackson
is.
Landing isn't.
But I
You
think
know
that's
what I
part
mean?
of the highlights, and we said
Right.
we were just gonna say the
Yeah,
uses
anyway.
first. You know what I
Fine.
mean?
Yeah, but that's
I
what
agree.
water,
This is-
we
If we're
changed it
taking
to water.
fishing,
We
like-
actually have been sort of changing the highlights as we go
Yeah.
along. too.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, good point.
it is, it's where my husband and I always fish, so.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
Yeah. So are you saying change it back to fishing?
I would, yeah, probably,
I think
I
it-
think you're right, 'cause fishing that's a really nice place to
It's a
fish.
highlight, yeah.
Like Doe
And it's one of the
Farm.
few places that you can actually get out there and fish too. I mean, as opposed to a lot of places where you've got so many bushes and stuff that,
Yeah,
you know, that'd be a little difficult. So you have to wade.
yeah.
But I think water access still, and then fishing is a highlight. Pike. I think we don't need to talk about Pike right now
Yeah,
because
exactly.
that's one that we're really sort of keeping on the down low because we don't want a lot of people on that property, so. I mean, you could put water access because that would show
Yeah.
people that but, you know, any hiking is just bushwhacking. There's no trails, so you can't
Yeah.
put trails, so
So there's no biking there,
no biking.
no bikes.
Would it be worthwhile putting in the word undeveloped next to Pike?
Yeah, and I think that's what it says on the website right now. So,
Yeah,
and like
so
we said,
maybe-
we're not planning to put a kiosk there. anyways.
Yeah, undeveloped. That's
so
a good
that's
idea.
that's like weeks. Those are undeveloped. Yeah.
Yeah. Spruce Hole Bog. Well, Spruce Hole Bog, it will just go by the same rules as Oyster River Forest. Well, no, that's not true.
No.
No hunting.
No hunting.
No hunting.
No hunting.
Which is going to be tricky
Which-
because they share the same kiosk.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
So that's why it goes back to the idea of the
The
separate
asterisk,
sign
yeah.
that is on there right now that says, and I'm sure, I mean, I don't know how confusing or not it is for people because do people really realize, because there's one parking lot for the two properties, do people really realize when they leave Oyster River Forest and they're on Spruce Hole Bog? Really not. So, so that's something, that would be something to consider also for the signage,
Yeah.
you know. But
Maybe-
once again, somebody can be walking through Spruce Hole Bog with
I
their
got it.
gun to get to the property where they're allowed to hunt.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so that's tricky, the Spruce Hole Bog, because
But I mean, it's
we're
still
gonna have
better-
one kiosk for
Yeah.
both, right?
Yeah.
So we should show the
That's
hunting on
another-
a map, maybe?
Yeah.
So that's something we should discuss later,
Yes.
but we should really be very mindful about how we display the information about hunting. So maybe having a separate sign with a clear map that shows the area and excludes on the map, like an aerial map or something, the Spruce Hole Bog area.
Yeah.
You know, something that would be really clear. So it would be we would have to be very careful about how we display that information.
Yeah.
If there's a dedicated section that's just all about hunting, maybe then there's a map of the two properties and like, you know, Spruce Hole Bog is shaded in
Right,
diagonally
right,
and says no
exactly.
hunting, and then the other one is
Right.
outlined and says hunting,
Right.
kind of.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yep.
Okay. Stevens Woods. Are there any that would not be included on Stevens Woods? You have the no hunting, no disturbing plants, no metal detect, no camping, no motorized vehicles, no horseback riding, and you would have walking, carry in, carry out, bicycles, dogs on leash, daily dawn to dusk, right? And then during hunting season, we will put up the signs reminding people that hunting is allowed on UNH property. Okay.
Are there any highlights for Stevens Woods? It should be listed.
Yeah, we will. That's, I don't want to do that today. Yeah, I think we have to discuss the highlights more in depth at another meeting,
Okay.
so that we can get through this. Stolworthy?
No bikes.
I don't know, I think kids might use bikes to get to school
Yeah.
on the main trail.
Yeah.
I
Right.
think it might be a violation of the covenant.
Well,
Oh.
a wildlife sanctuary, I don't think bikes necessarily